is up, everybody? Welcome to our live show. Happy Thursday. Welcome to PopStream for season 2. We are back, and it feels so good to be back. The official streaming show from your friends at Pop Culture Classroom, where we get together with your community to talk about your media because this is your PopStream. Because it's season 2 and we're back for the first time, we might be experiencing some technical issues. So if you are experiencing any audio issues on your end, any video issues on your end, just let us know. We got Chris on the ones and twos behind the scenes, so he will be working to fix any issues we got. I'm one of your hosts, Matt Slater. I'm the education program manager here at Pop Culture Classroom. You can find me at Maddie Slay on Twitter, and you can feel free to at me anytime you want. Let's chat. Let's get connected. Say hi. I love that. In future episodes of PopStream, I'll be joined by my co-host, the fabulous Dr. Tajan Campbell. But for every episode, I have the pleasure of being joined by a fabulous rotating cast. If you watched last season, you already know these folks. Today, we have two incredible artists and PCC instructors. First, we have Terra Necessary. Terra, how are you this evening?
Hello. Good. Glad to be back and doing this again.
Yes, welcome back to PopStream. I'm glad to have you here. And I'm also glad to have Dion Harris. How are you today?
I'm pretty good, sir. How about yourself?
I am doing great. Let's start with Tara. Just for anyone that hasn't met you, give us like the 2 minute, or sorry, not 2 minute, 2 sentence, like 30-second. Who are you? What do you do?
My name is Terra Necessary. I am a comic book artist and illustrator in the Denver metro area. And you can find my work everywhere with my co-artists at atomicpixies.com and Atomic Pixies everywhere on social media.
And Dion, who are you?
Otherwise known as the Shoe Thief on social media. And you can find me via either of those names on social media. I'm also an illustrator, and that's pretty much it.
Nice. I'm so excited to have you guys back. Audience, if you're watching live right now, I'm so excited to have you here with us for season 2 of PopStream. Today, we'll be digging deep into some comic and pop culture history, some nerd history, and talking big picture about why we need to talk about pop culture history in the first place. Why do we need to record it? Why do we need to tell people about it? We've got a really great interview with Fred Van Lente and Crystal Skillman that we're going to be playing for you. They're the creators of a new audio drama called King Kirby. And Tara and Dion are even going to be doing some head-to-head drawing for us. So think like a late-night drawing panel at a con, but this will be family-friendly. Don't worry. And of course, we'll be announcing the winner of our comic giveaway this week. Those of you who subscribed to PopStream within the window that we gave you were entered into a chance to win some free comics. These right here, signed by Fred Van Lente himself. So we'll be announcing the winner for that later on. So before we get to that, though, I'm going to give you the scoop on PopStream, especially those of you who have never joined us before. And we've got some new things for season 2. So let me tell you what's up. So this season, PopStream is going to be airing every other week, with the exception of next week, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Our first show of the month, every month, is simply called PopStream. That's it, just PopStream, nice and simple and clean. And that's where we're going to be diving deep into topics for all kinds of pop culture fans with guest authors and creators and folk that really have a unique perspective on the media that we all already love. So this show is going to talk about comics, graphic novels, manga, film and TV, and gaming. So no matter what brand of nerd you are, we got something for you, I promise. Then the second show of the month is a brand new show. It's called the PopStream Learning Lounge. So this show is designed specifically for educators, librarians, and parents because we'll be talking about specific ways to unlock the learning potential of pop culture in classrooms and other educational settings. So we'll have more great guest educators, experts. We'll have our rotating cast on that show as well. And we'll be talking lesson plans, sharing funny stories from the classroom, and incorporating the audience in demonstrations of exactly how pop culture properties can be used in an educational setting. But no matter which show you're watching, you can catch us live at our new time, Thursdays at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Joining us live means that you get to hang out with our community and interact with the cast and guests through our live chat. You can get your comments read on the air. You get your questions answered live, and you can get new insights from the rest of the community that's hanging out in the chat. So if you are watching live, if you are in the chat right now, say hi, say what's up. We want to hear from you. But if you're in the chat right now, I also want to know, what are you reading? What are you watching right now? But if you can't watch live, you can always catch the show on demand on YouTube and podcast services in the days after our live recording. But no matter how you enjoy PopStream, we hope you'll give us a like. We hope you'll share with your friends and give us some great reviews. And thank you for being here. We're building an awesome community, and we're so excited to have you. All right, so tonight we are talking all about comic and pop culture history. We have a great interview from, like I said, Fred Van Lente and Crystal Skillman. They have authored a play. They authored a play back in 2014 called King Kirby, all about the life of Jack Kirby, one of the most influential creators in comics. And then over the pandemic, they actually just turned it into an audio drama that is available on podcast services. So this isn't your average podcast where you just hear people talk like I'm doing right now. This is a fully produced radio play audio drama that's going to pull you through the narrative of Jack Kirby's life. So we interviewed them about their creation, but then we also got into a lot of just kind of history talk, because Fred Van Lente especially does a lot of comics. He wrote the comic book history of comics with his partner, Ryan Dunleavy, who did all the art. They have a couple of these. They actually are, you can pre-order the comic book history of animation out right now. So we're going to be diving into why is it important to talk about comic book history, pop culture history in general. So Terra and Dion, first of all, have y'all had a chance to listen to King Kirby yet? What did y'all think?
I mean, I love audio dramas always. Like, I think that's a really great medium for stories, and especially for this story, it like matched so well with the tone and what was going on at the time and the historical elements it's talking about.
Yeah. Dion, did you get, and you said you had a chance to listen as well?
Yes. One of the parts that I really loved about it is the earlier stages when he was like a child. I felt a lot of congruencies with my own childhood in that. So
Yeah, so the audio drama goes through all the way from his childhood through, all of his whole comics career, the entire thing with Stan Lee and their working relationship. It's in 4 pretty short episodes, like 20, 25-minute episodes, so it's really digestible. But this is not the type of podcast you want to listen to while you're cooking, while you're working out. You really want to make sure that you have time to like listen and enjoy, because there's some really great production value. So we talked, like I said, to Fred and to Crystal. And so we're going to go ahead and play their interview. We'll play it in 2 parts. We'll play the first part. Terra and Dion will come back and talk a little bit about it. And then we will play the second part. And then after that, we're going to get into our comic giveaway and our head-to-head drawing competition. So with that, Christopher in the back, if you are ready, let's play that interview.
Fred and Crystal, tell us a little bit about yourselves. Who are you? What do you do?
Well, we are appropriately beaming into you from some sort of cosmic sphere with this J.J. Abrams lens flash we've got going on here.
I love it.
It's the sunlight. This is like a real Tomb of Ra situation from Raiders, where we actually have the light is coming in at this time of year. This will go away in a couple minutes.
No, it just adds drama. It just adds impact.
Fred, I know that you're a comic creator, yes?
Yes.
Is that your main billing? How do you bill yourself?
Yes, I am a comic book writer. I dabble in other things like novels and plays. The plays most often with this young lady here.
Hello.
But I worked for Marvel for many years and wrote Amazing Spider-Man and Iron Man Legacy and Marvel Zombies and Taskmaster and Deadpool versus Punisher and Slapstick and Marvel Adventures, Fantastic Four, Power Pack. I mean, I did a lot of them. So lots of characters created or co-created by Jack Kirby.
Fantastic. And then lately you've been doing a little bit more, or maybe not lately, but within that career, you also have some history focus, right? With Action Presidents, comic book history.
Yeah, I do a lot of nonfiction comics. In fact, my very first Marvel comic and my first nonfiction comic, Action Philosophers #1, came out on the same day.
Oh, fantastic.
Back in 2005. That's right. So they've kind of been multiple tracks going on. And so with Ryan Dunleavy, we've done the comic book history of comics. We just wrapped up, actually it's still coming out from IDW. We just finished comic book history of animation.
Oh,
very exciting. But we've also done Action Philosophers and Action Presidents.
And Crystal, you're a playwright, correct?
Yes. Yep, and I write, and now we've kind of comic book writer, playwright, and then Fred started to write plays, and I started to write comics, and so it's our house is piled up with different media and different ways of working. So yes, I'm known as a playwright. I wrote a play called Open that happened a couple of years ago that has reopened work for my plays like Rain's Always Save the World and Pulp Verite, which was just shown at the Playwright Center. And then I'm the book writer of a lot of musicals. I'm the book writer of Mary and Max, the musical. Bobby Cronin is the composer of that. Bobby Cronin did the composition for King Kirby, the audio drama, which I know we're going to get into. Mm-hmm. So comics, and our comic book is Eat Fighter that we've written together.
On Webtoon.
Yeah, I like writing in all mediums, but known as a playwright, non-similar to Fred, who's known as a comic book writer, but also writes novels and different things.
This is so fantastic. My undergrad is in theater, and then I transitioned to education and teaching after that. So I'm just like, my nerd senses are tingling a lot right now. We'll try not to go down too many rabbit holes. I know Tajan's like all in that same area.
all these questions, I'm like, oh, let's talk about the relationship between music and what is it like to write the book and all of these things that have nothing to do with what we're going to talk about today. So if I start going down too many rabbit holes, Matt can give me a look.
Don't worry, musicals can always be involved. It's very easy.
Yes. I just, on the latest episode of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, they were talking about like a cop drama musical. And I was like, oh, who did that? Why?
Oh, yeah.
Cop Rock.
Cop Rock.
Yes, Cop Rock. There you go. Yeah.
Well, we can't forget that they made a Spider-Man musical. So if we need to find a crossover, that's where it is right there. Now everything we've talked about is connected and it's on topic.
That's right.
So you all created King Kirby, which originated as a play, an off-Broadway play, correct?
Right.
Yes.
And it's just been released as an audio drama. It's on podcast platforms. So it's all about the life of Jack Kirby, which is a huge influential, the king of comics, right? But for those who may not know who Jack Kirby is, could you give us like a brief description? What is his influence? Why is he important?
Sure. I mean, Kirby's life kind of goes throughout the history of comics in the 20th century. In the 40s, he co-created Captain America with Joe Simon, along with Boy Commandos at DC and a bunch of patriotic comics. The most obvious sort of salient fact about Captain America comics, one obviously, is that famously Cap is punching Hitler in the face on the cover, which was very unusual for comics in those days because it was such an overtly political statement. Martin Goodman, as he says in our play, really did wonder. Well, he was worried that he would get sued by him.
I remember hearing that, and I was like, why is that what you're worried about? I actually was looking at I downloaded the first issue of Captain America, and it was funny because it does say in the beginning, like, any references to real people living or dead are completely fictionalized. And there's like Hitler on the very, the front cover.
Right. Well, yeah, that probably doesn't apply to Hitler. But, Captain America was not the first patriotic superhero. In fact, the shield from Archie, back then known as MLJ, had appeared 4 months beforehand. And in fact, as you may have noticed, also in Captain America Comics #1, Cap's shield is triangular, not round. And that's because, and that's partly because probably Joe Simon maybe ripped off the shield a little bit. In order to do Captain America, but then Archie threatened to sue, and so that's why they changed the shield to round, to get MLJ/Archie off their back. So that was sort of like a case of lawyers doing something that was.
You want to mess with Archie?
Yeah, a little accidentally helpful, because I think we can all agree the shield works much better as round as a frisbee than it does as a spear. I can imagine him chucking it at people and
not as effective.
Different visual there.
Yeah, exactly. So because Martin Goodman was worried about being sued by Hitler, but also simultaneously he was worried about Hitler being assassinated because he was in such a volatile situation in Europe, that he wanted to rush out Captain America #1 as quickly as possible. So that, again, as depicted in the play, Kirby just basically, I don't know how much coffee Kirby drank in his lifetime, but if I was him, I would have just guzzled it.
Yes.
And just through 60 pages of Captain America. That's partly why Kirby was able to develop such a dynamic style, was because he was working so quickly. At the top of his game, he was doing 9 pages a day, which is bananas. Like these days, you're lucky to get a page every 2 days.
I got the sense of that too with his wife. The first thing she asks when he comes home is your hand okay? And just the significance of that as a joke that your wife would make, but also as the reality of that.
Can you still make us money?
Yeah, that was a direct quote. That was from a letter that she wrote her. Then he went off and fought in France in World War II. So he's like one of the few superhero comic artists who we actually know killed somebody. They draw fighting all the time, but remarkably few people have actually killed anybody. And then he came back and with Joe Simon created Young Romance and a lot of the iconic romance comics of the late 40s, early 50s that Roy Lichtenstein and later pop artists used as sort of the big iconography of that era. And then he kind of bounced around once comics got into serious trouble through the Wortham purges and that whole scare in the 50s, and wound up at Marvel, where he worked with Stan Lee and did Fantastic Four, Hulk, Thor, Avengers, the X-Men, Iron Man, Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D.
All the ones that the kids love these days.
Yes.
That's right.
The universe you know today, the Marvel universe.
Had a significant hand in creating Spider-Man, although Steve Ditko was the main sort of driving force there. But then sort of fell out with Stan because Stan really had this burning need to take credit for everything. Went back to DC for the third time. I didn't even mention the second time he went to DC. That's Green Arrow and Challenges the Unknown, and a lot of other things. He went to DC where he created The New Gods, Darkseid, Mr. Miracle, The Demon, my personal favorite, Commandy, and then ended up back at Marvel for a third time. So yeah, three. So started out Marvel. Okay, right. Back at Marvel for the third time, where he created the Eternals, Machine Man. He had a very lengthy run on Captain America again. His third run on Captain America. That time, that's when he was paired with the Falcon.
So if you're a fan of a comic character, there's a pretty big chance that Kirby had his hand in it somehow.
He is without question the single most important figure in superhero comics, period.
And we haven't even mentioned Wanda, and he's a little part Vision, but he created Wanda. So everything you see right now on TV.
The Vision we know from WandaVision was sort of based on a 40s Vision character that he and Joe Simon created at the same time as Captain America, although the Android Vision is much different. And then he spent a lot of the 80s fighting with Marvel, trying to get his artwork back, as Marvel was sort of using his artwork as a bargaining chip to make sure that Kirby signed away all of his rights. Kirby died in, I believe it was 92 or 93. And his heirs ended up suing Marvel, and Marvel ended up settling. I should say Disney settled with them before the case could go to the Supreme Court. Which I think all corporate owners of entertainment were pooping their pants about. They didn't want to take the chance, because if the court had a precedence about work for hire, then a lot of these properties that they make a ton of money off of, they would have ended up going to heirs of various creators.
So why do you think that this is such an important story to tell, right? Obviously, there's lots of history here. There's some really intriguing things. There's a lot of content for someone who's interested in the MCU and comics to dive in, but why is this an important story to tell?
Well, I think it's an interesting story because people generally don't care where their pop culture comes from. They think it's sort of cranked out by a factory, and I think it's important for people to understand that real human beings do this. So to me, it's really almost like a labor story. It's a story of working people. And we have a real tendency in this culture to really put down working people in a really offensive way. And I just think it's important to sort of raise some of these folks up to be the heroes they truly are.
Especially in the arts.
Especially in the arts. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's seen as that, and it's kind of addressed a little bit in the play. So often the arts and even the comic arts are seen as it's pulp, it's filler, it's not important, right? But clearly it has such a huge impact on so many people that in and of itself elevates it up to that level of importance.
Well, and it's art that's literature. That's a lot of what the function of what you're doing. And my pre-Fred comics universe was when I was like a teenager or late teens. I saw, maybe early 20s, I saw Mouse, the original graphic novel framed at MoMA, and Room After Room, both books. And I remember always appreciating graphic novels, but I don't think I did to that extent where it was that experience was revelatory. And to come back to this, also drawing is storytelling. So when we get into the meat and bones of what the story is, in terms of the drama of it, we have two creators who see things very differently and how that happened. But we're really focusing on the life of Kirby and then meeting this individual and what that becomes, who is obviously Stan Lee. But it also really wonderfully brings you along on that journey of, what is writing? What is storytelling? What is creation? It really is about an artist's life. It's really, I guess we're just so passionate about it as two artists that live together or are passionate about the arts being jobs as well. I'm a teacher with the Theater Development Fund. I teach how plays work and how comics made from like Fun Home the Musical works, how King Kirby works. And one of the things that I just love is when teenagers' eyes light up, they're like, I can do that. I was like, yeah, you could, this is what I'm teaching right now. You could use this and write a video game. There's a way to do what you love and figure out what part of that and component you want to do. And so, so there's a lot in King Kirby that is about that. And I hope pays homage to the fact that he himself was a really great mentor to many, many artists, which is why I think he's got so many people wanting to hear his story. Even though Stan was the bigger figure, he had a lot of Padawans, shall we say, that learned from studying him, wanting to be like him, or taking his artwork forward in a new direction.
I think that's what I enjoyed most about the audio drama was the humanity it brought to the character, and also that you get to see how much of his life played into what he was creating, and how, often we take pop culture as, like you had said, something that's kind of created off screen. We don't care about the creation process, but the reality of he went to war, he was talking about and exploring things that he had experienced. He was exploring things that he wanted to experience with the sci-fi pieces and just the human nature of it.
And kind of going off that value and what you guys have talked about with Stan Lee and kind of that relationship, I feel like in the comics community, there's a rising awareness about, how much Stan Lee contributed to some of these stories in comparison to Kirby. And you addressed that a lot in episode 4, starting kind of in episode 3, but a lot in episode 4 of the drama. So how did you decide to tackle that? I mean, are you guys fictionalizing these conversations? Are you drawing upon, recordings or eyewitness accounts? How do you choose to handle that?
This has been something that's sort of gone back to the 80s, back when Kirby was fighting to get his artwork back. And, there's been a recent biography of Stan called True Believer that our friend Abraham Reisman wrote, excuse me. And in it, he makes clear that, the historical record, what historians like to have, documentation of a lot of Stan's contributions is pretty much nil. We know that even before the Marvel stuff was created, the typical way that Stan would work was he would, at best, type out a 2-page synopsis that the artist would then have to break down into, actual pages and draw pages. I write scripts like screenplay, draw this in this panel, and then so-and-so says this line of dialogue. There was none of that in the Stan Lee days. The artist would then bring the art into the Marvel offices, and then Stan would add the dialogue, which is not an inconsequential thing. Stan had a very particular way of writing dialogue. He was talking to the readers in captions. He was talking to them in sort of his editorials and the letter column. So, that's why Stan sort of is Mr. Marvel, because he was sort of the continuity on regardless of who was drawing the comic, it was always Stan's voice you were hearing in your head as you were reading. So that was very powerful and important. But when it came to things like, Wally Wood was a legendary artist who quit Daredevil. He's one of the first artists in Daredevil because he realized he was writing, essentially doing what I would call writing, and he would put in the dialogue in the panels. But Stan would only take all the credit. And this is also important. Stan was also picking up the page rate for writing. So, some guys like Wally Wood, like Steve Ditko, creator of Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, and Kirby ultimately got fed up with this and quit. Kirby stuck around the longest, but then he had created the most characters, and so he had the most to lose by quitting.
The works that he's created and influential, but his kind of fight to get back his artwork and all the different things that happened with the rights to his work. Do you think that's been influential on comics or pop culture in our modern age?
Yes. I mean, I don't think I would get royalties for my Marvel work if it wasn't for Jack Kirby and the struggle of people like that, and the struggle of guys like Neil Adams who fought to get Siegel and Schuster credit and compensation. That was part of a whole sort of 80s movement, you know. Frank Miller was somebody who was very vocal about trying to get justice for Jack, and a lot of those creators ended up, you know, doing creator-owned stuff like Sin City and Hellboy, and you know, a lot of those great creator-owned works here in America wouldn't really. I mean, they were possible, but they wouldn't have been as prevalent, I think, and happened as soon if Kirby hadn't had to fight to get his artwork back in such a public fashion.
And I think all this conversation we have, especially now in the pandemic, as we're all creating, I mean, the story, Kirby's story, very much, you know, it's so great to hear the story in the pandemic because we're at a point in our lives where we go, why am I doing what I do? What am I passionate about? How does this work?
Everyone's reevaluating. Yeah.
Everyone's reevaluating. And so because you're on a life journey where someone's saying, you know, I think I've been exploited. What does that mean? Like, you know, I want to keep creating. And what is that? So this conversation about IP that we have with all the works that we're creating, or if you're creating a new kind of work in the pandemic, maybe you're trying an audio drama for the first time or something like that. And you're weighing the possibilities of writing a story for someone and they own it, or owning it yourself, which is more independent, but you have the IP, right? Or sometimes a mix. Depending on where. And, you know, it's everyone is starting to understand that owning the property is extremely valuable and important. And it's a value of yourself and your work and what you're doing. Or if you're going to give it away, that you understand you're giving it away and you can make your peace with that. So there's a lot in this conversation about art and work that's very valuable for artists to think about. And it's something that also has gone over pretty minutely in comic book histories of comics.
It's funny that you bring that up because that's like my comic book textbook. That's how I know my comic book history. I think that this audio drama, King Kirby, is, you know, it is so engaging and interesting to listen to that you don't have to be a comics fan in order to enjoy the story that's being told, right? But for an average fan or someone who's really into the MCU, do you think they need to know anything before they dive in? Or do you think this is a good starting point to kind of learn that history behind these characters that you love?
I think it's a pretty self-contained story. I mean, this guy's life is just kind of amazing, you know, like I don't, even if you could give, you know, even if you could care less about comics, I think it's really interesting.
Fred's idea of starting with the auction, which, you know, in which we really are brought into the fact that these priceless pieces of art are being sold at a price that he will never see. And I think any audience member is instantly, you know, into the dramatic question, which is how did that happen, and how can he let his worth be taken from him, and was it? Some people have actually called it a pop culture death of a salesman because it has a working class kind of questions. And
so I have a couple questions about some history things because, you know, obviously this play documents history. Fred, a lot of your work is documenting the history of comics and other history in a comic format. So what drew you to this? Like, what drew you to being the people that are going to tell other people about history?
Just something I've always been interested in. You know, I can't, ever since I was a kid, I was fascinated by it. I love going to historical places. I spend most of my pleasure reading is history, either magazines or books. My sister got me my Christmas presents was a history of Al Capone and gangland Chicago, and I have no, you know, plans on doing a professional thing about that. I just like reading about it, you know.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, it's just my thing, and I'm a pretty good explainer. Like I figured out when I was a grad student, and had to teach like intro writing courses. I found that I had a skill for that I was a good explainer. And comics are among the greatest media for explaining things.
You get your visuals and your text right there.
Precisely. So that really kind of drew myself to it. And when you got somebody like Ryan Dunleavy, who I do a lot of my work with, he can literally draw anything. And he's usually pretty good at it. He's also a great mimic of various styles, like cartoon comic styles. So that lends itself to sort of our satiric wise ass takes on history.
I am a big video game fan. Like that is my pop culture-dom expertise that I have lived since I was 3 years old. And there's a lot of talk in the video game industry about preserving history, right? Because since it's a somewhat new industry, it's very easy to lose that history. So when it comes to archiving games, making sure that, people that have developed certain things all get written down in history, there's a big worry that some of that might get lost. Is that something that the comic book industry is worried about? How much comic history is out there? And is that, are we worried that we might lose some of it if we don't do this task of going and uncovering it and telling others about it?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't say that we are planning on doing the comic book history of video games as our next project.
Yes.
We will get into later in the year. I don't want to make too many promises because I haven't really started working on it yet, but that's the plan. The great thing about obsessive fans is they like to interview their heroes and they like to collect things. So what's great, particularly like with somebody like Jack Kirby, who has been interviewed 8 zillion times, and there used to be a whole magazine called the Jack Kirby Collector. Actually, I guess they still do the Jack Kirby Collector. That is just sort of a compendium of these interviews. Is that info is all out there. So if it's and all these sort of like, I mean, I bet you a lot of golden age, like earlier, like a couple generations before, I bet you a lot of that has been lost. But the lucky thing when we're doing comics history is that there is a lot of resources out there, simply because the fans of this material have really gone, above and beyond the call of duty to preserve it. Also comics are literature, so it sort of lends itself to that kind of chronicling, like video games, obviously, you have a lot of that's much more challenging because that's all locked up in very often very archaic, outmoded technology that you just don't have access to, and it's all on electrons. They're just going to dissipate in the ether. There's no physical record like a piece of paper, that
right
can be stored for a lot of that stuff. I'm doing a project where I was doing when I grew up in the 80s, the thing that I was really into was all text adventure games like Infocom and that stuff. And that stuff, there used to be emulators for it, but the problem is the browser code just keeps getting updated and the emulators stop working, and so it's very hard to get emulators for things like Zork, for example. So that I was doing that earlier this year, and that was really challenging.
I would say too, with what Fred's doing with the history, which is really interesting to me, is and it was with action philosophers too, it's with all of them, is I think he sees these connections between things, and he's not saying, this is my take on it, this is the way it was. He's just seeing how things relate to one another. So I think in action philosophers, it's so exciting because he's got that real eye of like, what am I thinking about today and how does it relate to me? And also their own personal revelations in their lives and seeing things there. And then comic book history, what I love is how maybe these creators aren't even aware of how much they're influencing each other over history, but Fred's seeing that map. And so I just think each nonfiction book that Fred does has some kind of relationship of that. He's finding the relationships of the relationships and showing it to us that so it is information, it is explaining things, but and how they work, but it's also showing us things that we may not have seen, or little roads that we may not have been like, if these two people never met, then this would have never happened, or if this person didn't overhear this, and that makes, and as the playwright in me, as you can tell, that's great drama. So like that's what brought me in, is I'm like, oh, Will Eisner wouldn't have figured that out. And,
I didn't make her say that. That was totally
that's why
I
read them. We were once at a Comic-Con, and I think over breakfast I was like, I have a question about comic book history. I was talking to another comic book creator, and I was like, I'm going to go ask Fred. And he's like, it must be great when you could ask your husband everything, just because he just is this encyclopedia.
Encyclopedic knowledge. So at Pop Culture Classroom, obviously we love this kind of stuff, right? This is what we do, and marrying the pop culture with the academic and the history and getting into the nitty gritty, and this connects with this in these ways. What has the general reception been? I mean, you've created a ton of books, Fred, and especially with something like King Kirby that's documenting this history. What's the general reception been? How have people enjoyed it?
It's been very, very positive. Particularly Comic Book History Comics got a great response. The Comic Book History of Animation is doing very well. Ryan and I have been doing the nonfiction comics since 2003, believe it or not. So history's kind of caught up to us. Now lots and lots and lots of people are doing nonfiction comics, which is great. Unfortunately, it means it gets us it makes it a little bit harder for us to get noticed, because before you could just do a comic book philosophy and people be like, comic philosophy, that's crazy.
It's new.
God.
Yeah.
My mind is blown, but now it's like, oh, there's another comic about philosophy. Throw it on the pile.
Are you seeing it used in schools a lot, or has that been a good adoption there?
Action philosopher specifically, it's had its moments in schools. We're actually doing a Kickstarter that's starting this month to get to do it in color. So I'm very excited about that. So if you want your philosophers in color, support that Kickstarter. It should be live in a couple weeks from us taping this. But the Department of Education here in the city of New York has hired Ryan and I to do a bunch of comics for them. And so right before the pandemic hit, every middle schooler in the public school system here in New York City got a comic called Action Activists.
I got to speak to you at New York Comic Con, the last one that happened, and you were talking about that happening. So that's great to hear that.
Yeah. So and hopefully very shortly we'll be doing another one.
Fantastic.
So about sort of the history of activism in New York City, how you become an activist both in the streets and in City Hall. When you have the Department of Education, having you to do comics, that's pretty cool, and a direct result of them enjoying our Action Presidents and some of our other comics.
Audio dramas, they're not as popular as they used to be back in the day with like radio plays and things like that. And this could be my own ignorance speaking, because I haven't heard many audio dramas lately. But that's kind of the sense that I get. But podcast channels seem to be the perfect fit for it. I mean, King Kirby was a great demonstration of how well it works in that episodic format, and just getting it right to your phone. There's tons of podcasts for history buffs, revisionist history, lots of things in that vein. But how do you think that this format differs, and what would you like to see more history recounted in more of a dramatized format, and why?
Yeah, I mean, we've had some talks. Ryan and I specifically have. Crystal it's not history, but Crystal's starting in on a new podcast drama that's going to start airing here pretty soon. That it's storytelling, and it's just another medium to sort of do storytelling in. And I think it's a really neat and exciting, and there's very little things you can't do in it,
Yeah, and it really allows you to have interaction with your imagination, and so I think it adds and that's really the magic of it, as you know, in the pop culture classroom of imagination, because it isn't so much the teacher doing such a great job and acting everything out, even though that's fun. It's more the teacher having fun. It's doing just enough so that the student can engage, and by engaging is using their imagination to then walk through these moments of history or imagine them or learn. And so it's I do think education, history, going and real life stories go so well with podcasts because of that investigative nature and exploring that way. It's a great educational tool. But Fred and I have always felt that any project you have, just examine it and just ask yourself, where can it most powerfully land? Is it more powerful being heard? Is it more powerful being seen live? Is it more powerful, which will come back, and it's going to be starting outside pretty soon in the spring and summer. So I can say that now, theater friends, don't cry. It's okay. We're thawing out. We're thawing out.
My husband is a theater practitioner, and it's been a crazy year.
A crazy year. And talk about work and art being investigated. Yes. But so
where can people find and listen to King Kirby right now?
Well, anywhere you get your podcast. It's on Apple, Google, Spotify. You can go to Broadway. It's on Broadway Podcast Networks. You can go to the website.
And it's available for free, but if people wanted to support this work, what could people do to do that?
Well, we also have a social media presence. We have King Kirby Play on Insta and on Twitter. Please follow those.
Our books and or plays are for sale at Amazon and all fine.
Yes,
you can purchase the script, right?
Yes, on Amazon.
And as well, let's see, I'm at Concord Theatricals, used to be Sam French, and Dramatist Play Service in terms of my plays. And
are the rights to the play available to purchase if someone wanted to put on this play?
Yep.
Yeah, they just have to get in touch with us. We have like, different, we have so many, we have lawyers and agents, all sorts of things, but all that one does is they just say the number of performances and that would be, it could be live streaming, it could be whatever. And then we would just do a simple contract, very, very easy.
Awesome.
I cannot thank Fred and Crystal enough for that really great interview. And again, I just really encourage everybody to go out and listen to King Kirby on podcast services. It's really, really great. One of the things that they mentioned in this interview is Fred said that pop culture fans are obsessive. And that's where we get a lot of our history from, right? And I know Terra and Dion, both of you, from speaking to you in the past, y'all are such a wealth of knowledge on manga and comics and other pop culture. So where do you go to learn about your history? Is it something that you intentionally seek out, or do you just kind of absorb it through being part of the community? Dion, we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, for myself, I just kind of absorb it, just being a part of the community. Like, even when I'm like just watching something random while I'm streaming or something, somebody will like come into the chat and say, "Oh, have you seen this?" Or, "Do you know about this manga or this anime?" And it just kind of like, spreads organically, kind of gets you like interested in different things. And I'll go back and like watch something on YouTube, and that'll like get me interested in something else.
I feel like
it just kind of happens organically.
We're blessed to have like YouTube and podcasts these days, to give us all of that. Even just watching something and being able to pick up the phone and Google, where it came from.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we don't have to be as intentional about seeking out, our history as maybe we used to.
Yeah.
For me, as a gamer, I know that for a lot of older games, especially, knowing that history, maybe not necessarily about how that product came to be or how that game came to be, but what the landscape was at the time when that game came out, really affects. That's how I talk to my husband about it. I might be playing something and I may be like, but you don't understand. Like, when this came out, this wasn't a thing. And this was the first game ever to have an over-the-shoulder camera, right? So for me, that history is very much a part of like why I love some of these things. And, I can say like, no, Resident Evil 4 is amazing because, of its historical context, right?
Actually, I totally agree. I was thinking negative. You're right. I totally love knowing that, like, oh, this thing took a ton of work, or one person slaved over this for 5 years to make it, and this is a product of love.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, sometimes maybe that makes you appreciate the rough edges a little bit more too. Like,
absolutely. And then both of you guys have worked on Pop Culture Classroom's Colorful History line of comics. One thing that Fred talked about is that he creates a lot of history in comic format, whether it is the history of comics in a comic format or whether it is action philosophers or action presidents, which is history in a comic format. What do you think the advantages of learning history or other subjects are in a comic format or like any sort of kind of pop culture format?
Well, for me personally, teaching the younger kids like history or just about any subject using comic books, I found that it tends to engage them a bit quicker or a bit easier. So that's one thing I'd definitely say for the medium.
Yeah, I think that.
Bless you.
I think that my feelings is that when you make a comic book, more than any other medium, you have so much control over the narrative and what the viewer is experiencing it. And especially with history, particularly, that can be a lot of like dates and dead people and things that like people can't connect to. That can make it really powerful. Like thinking back on Mouse, like Mouse was so powerful because you were seeing this event from a dude's point of view, like a very complicated and unique point of view, and like it couldn't be recreated in any other way. The imagery is what made it what it is. The words, everything came together exactly that way to give you that exact experience. And I think comics are really good at that because they do, they give tunnel vision, but not in a bad way. It helps you focus on a moment or an aspect of something rather than, the whole overwhelming hugeness of it.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there.
Mouse is like, Yeah, I was gonna say Mouse is, even though it's set in the same era as like the Schindler's List, obviously, it's a completely different tone and like shown from a completely different angle. So I agree, Tara.
When you're reading out of a textbook, it's a little bit harder to get that emotional connection, right? It's kind of that empathetic part where it's put yourself in these people's shoes. It's easier to overlook that, or it's easier to not think about it. But when you have those images there, the facial expressions are right there, the visual representation is right there. And so for me, it's a lot more organic to kind of get the real impact rather than, yeah, like you said, Tara, this happened on this date. You get more of the, why does that matter? You know?
You can also control, I think it's really important to me, like, again, going back to Mouse, that I could read a page over and over again or put the book down. Whereas in like a movie, like to compare it to Schindler's List, which is a wonderful movie that is exploring a lot of the same events, but it's going. And you're going with it, which is also its own unique experience. I'm not by any means bragging on Schindler's List here, obviously. Get that.
Awful. It's awful.
No, not at all. But like when you have just this book and it's just this experience between you and the book, maybe you're alone or on a bus with headphones, you know, you can look at a powerful image for 10 minutes and really let it sink in. You can read a panel over and over again till you understand it or till it sinks in. And I think with history, that's really important.
Absolutely, yeah. So in just a moment, Tara and Dion will be drawing their interpretations head to head of some of these cool moments that we think are fun in pop culture history. So if you're in the chat right now, tell me what some of your favorite bits of pop culture historical trivia are, and we'll illustrate them. We'll bring them to life. And, you know, quick sketches head to head here. It's going to be great. It could be the creation of one of your favorite properties. It could be a behind the scenes story, any of those type of topics. But before we get to that, if you would like to help us carry out our mission, you can visit our volunteering website. Right now, we are not only looking for a core of boots on the ground volunteers to help us with events, but also folks who can donate their time for graphic design needs, video production needs, and marketing needs. So you can visit popcultureclassroom.org/volunteer to learn more about how you can volunteer and help out Pop Culture Classroom and help us spread the mission of pop culture-based education. And you know what? If you don't have time to volunteer, but you still want to help out with our mission, you can do that in so many different ways. One of the other ways you can do that right now is by purchasing a t-shirt from Pop Culture Classroom. So we have these amazing Pop Culture Classroom t-shirts. I was going to point to my t-shirt, but it's not actually this one. It's a different one. It's got our logo on it. But you can purchase those at store.popcultureclassroom.org. We have mugs too. So, you know, when you're drinking your morning coffee, you can drink out of a Pop Culture Classroom mug. So again, any purchases you make there, those funds go towards helping us advance our mission, and we would very much appreciate your help. Tara and Dion, are y'all ready to draw?
I'm ready.
Excellent. So the way this is going to work is we're going to pick a moment in pop culture history, and then Tara and Dion, y'all are going to choose however you want to represent that. You can represent it in one image. You can represent it in a 4-panel comic. You can represent it with your own spin on it or with some humor. However you choose to do that. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes. We'll probably have enough time to do 1 or 2 of these. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to draw your interpretation of this this historical piece of info. So I think what we're going to start with, because we were talking about Mr. Kirby here, I want us to draw your interpretations of the Marvel method. Okay. So for anyone listening who may be unfamiliar, the Marvel method is what we call Stan Lee's method of working, where again, he would kind of draw up a scenario. He would write maybe a 1 or 2 page synopsis of these characters and what they were going to do in a story and where the story might go, hand it off to a creator like Jack Kirby, who would then draw it and actually figure out, okay, how is this story going to be told in a comic? And then Mr. Lee would then come in and fill in the blanks with the dialogue. So I want to know, Tara and Dion, what is your interpretation of what the Marvel method actually looks like as it was happening in the bullpen in the studios, right? Do you understand your assignment?
I do.
Yes.
Of course, my screen died with my art exactly when I started to do this. So I'm going to be like, There we go.
That's all right. You got 5 minutes. We'll get it back up. All right. If you folks are ready, I'm going to set my timer. And of course, if you're in the audience, feel free to kind of give your ideas here of what our artists could do to, put a funny spin or something like that on their work. So you've got 5 minutes on the clock. Go.
I feel like this is how he felt like he was working. Stanley, there's some like non-stick figure legs. Okay, so I don't put my pen down at all. This is Stanley recording into his I'm sure he had a little, I cannot imagine he's not the kind of guy who had like a little recording tape recorder around with him at all the time. He was like, hey, my King Kirby, I've got a new idea. And Kirby just being like, I bet you do.
All right. I think we've got time for one more of these. I hope you guys had a wonderful evening hanging out with us. We will see you next week for our first episode of The Learning Lounge. And until next time, be safe out there. Bye, y'all.